have our next speaker, Dr. Sohom Chakrabarty, Associate Professor, IIT Roorkee. The topic is Perception of Truth as per Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Thank you.
I hope I am audible. So I'm sort of filling in between Jyotiranjan, Praveenji and Venkatesh just to give you a break from what they are trying to say. And but I am also continuing on the discussions that were happening around all different sorts of perception, and they are trying to understand them from majorly from Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Many speakers already talked on that aspect and other texts. And I have giants here on philosophy, and I am a newborn, I should say. And because my background is from engineering, and I'm trying to understand all the different ideas that we are thrown into by our parents, various philosophical ideas that we are brought up with from our childhood, and then our own insights that I have developed over time, going through the practices of yoga, and then reading on the texts of Patanjali Yoga Sutra and Sankhya Karika. All these things come together as I will try to present the same ideas that has been presenting from the morning, but I will try to present them from a more technical point of view, and I would like to just assess here who are more technicians or technologists or engineers in the crowd like me. Please raise your hand, so I will like maybe resonate with you guys more rather than people from philosophy here, because I would like to describe the philosophy more with diagrams and all, which usually you will not see. But I would like to just go through some of the discussions that happened today, some of the things that I noted and that struck me, maybe some questions, maybe some doubts, and I would like to pose them as open questions here. So I heard on the definition of perception that it requires sense organs to be involved, and also I heard that there is acknowledgement of yogic perception, which is a perception without sense organs. So what is going on there? Abheda, Advaita, some very interesting thought given by Penna ji, that subject-object perception is a single compound, hence subject-object sustain each other through perception. But usual understanding is that the subject or the Sakshi is a fundamental cause, and this is somewhat conflicted in the above statement. And another thing is that knowing is a characteristic of consciousness, and I would like to say that it may be using certain tools in order to know. So that may be a possibility. And some other things like this is my understandings. Is perception same as Pratyakṣa? So maybe we can make a distinction. Pratyakṣa requires sense organs, whereas perception can be more general and subtle as well without the use of sense organs. What is a fundamental cause? So do we need that everything originate from the same substance in order for it to be a fundamental cause? So this is a question. Pratyakṣa, the only praman. Can others? So we have heard Sachchidananda ji was there talking about Charvaks, and they were relying on Pratyakṣa as the only praman. So even if we rely on Pratyakṣa as the only praman, can others be taken as praman like Anuman and Shabda if they are enabled to Pratyakṣa? So this is something I want to ask. So suppose there is an inference made by someone, and if that inference is tenable to Pratyakṣa, someone can do Pratyakṣa of it in some way, in some place and in some time, then I say that this inference is some praman. If there is a shabda or a agama, some statement, some qualified statement, and right away you are not able to apprehend that statement, but there is a way, someone at some place at some time would be able to do Pratyakṣa of that statement, then I will say that this is a qualified statement. So if that is possible, then I think those inferences and statements will also qualify as praman. So here we can have a merging of these concepts of Pratyakṣa as well as the others. So I start with my talk with some expecting some background on these things. So I expect even if you're from engineering and technology background, maybe you have heard about three gunas. So the three guna theory, and then some understanding of the three sharidatraya, that there is a sthula level, the gross level, and the sukshma level, and the karana level. So people don't usually talk about the karana level, but I usually talk more about the karana level. And these ideas of Purusha, Prakriti and Mula Prakriti, some bit of idea is fine. We don't need to get into exact definition in order to understand what I am trying to talk about. And some working definition concepts, because some words are used in very specific ways but to mean very different things by different people. So what I would mean by self is Atman, observer and Sakshi, and I will never mean self as soul. They are not the same thing to me. And soul, if I ever refer to soul, I usually don't refer to that word. I will mean it as a causal body. And the self is something that is not bound in ahankar identity. Soul is bound in ahankar identity. So these are something that I will start with, and the topics of discussion will go like this. I'll first try to explain about Chitta and Atman, and there will be a lot of concepts covered in there. And then the ontology of perception as per Patanjali Yoga Sutra, and then some things which has been described in the Kaivalya Ultimate Freedom, that chapter of the Patanjali Yoga Sutra. And then I would like to give this disclaimer. You all know probably about this. The knowledge is one, and the knowledgeable try to describe it differently. So I am trying to just describe the same thing that is out there in the book in a different way. So with that, I would like to start. So what is Chitta? Chitta as defined in Patanjali, if you have some, so my understanding and some other people's also understanding is that it is the field of consciousness to which objects are presented as perceived. So you see a diagram here, object outside this blue oval shape. The blue oval shape is the field of consciousness. The object is presented in that field of consciousness, and then it becomes a percept in that field of consciousness. Chitta is not Atman. Chitta is a field of consciousness, whereas Atman is the self or pure awareness, the observer Sakshi, and it is that black dot you are seeing there. And the black dot I have placed inside the blue oval. Okay, so it is like the blue oval, the consciousness, the field of consciousness is surrounding the self. So the self, along with the field of consciousness, is there, existing out there, and the object has been presented to the field of consciousness. Okay, now this percept are presented in the chitta to be perceived by the self. Why they are presented in the chitta, in the field of consciousness? Because they will be perceived by the self. Okay, the self comes with the field of consciousness, wants to perceive the object out there. The object gets is presented in the field of consciousness to be perceived by the self. And this is an analogy that we all have heard about from our very childhood, that there's a lake and things are getting reflected on that lake and we seeing the reflection. So chitta is like that lake where reality is reflected as percept. Self is the one perceiving that reflection. Self is the one perceiving that reflection. So you see the object and the percept are like some reflection. So you see the lighter and the darker side, so some gradient is there. So just to make that idea that it is a reflection. Now what should be the arrow relationship between self and the percept? So I have drawn an arrow from the object to the percept as if it is presented there. Now if the self has to perceive the percept in the chitta, what sort of arrow diagram should be there? There's an open question out there. You can try to answer maybe. Anyone of you would like to answer? What type of arrow relationship should be there? Should it be from the percept to the self? Should it be from the self to the percept? Percept to the self, raise your hands. Percept to the self, self to the percept. Both? Anyone both? Why both?
Once the interaction happens, it's not a one-way process.
Hmm.
The object also influences it.
It would be like this, because the who wants to perceive? The chitta, the self wants to perceive. The self would go towards the perceived, and it is perceived by the self again. The self wants to perceive, and it's perceived by the self. Self goes to the perceived and brings the perceived back to the self. This is the way it happens. Any perceived that is presented to the chitta, now the self is going to that perceived and coming back. So I am going to the table and coming back. If I close all my the tools of perception, I am not going to the table. I open the tools of perception, I am immediately reaching out and then bringing it back to myself. This all is happening through my field of consciousness. Because I have a field of consciousness, this everything can happen. So everything is getting reflected in that field of consciousness. Self is the Purusha utilizing the Chitta for perception of objects in Prakriti, whereas it is independent of the need of such perception. So you have to remember this, that the self is actually independent of the need of such perception. The self does not need to perceive. It perceives, but it does not need to perceive. Okay. So the field of consciousness is also, this blue oval is also the repository of our innermost attitudes and desires, giving rise to our thoughts and feelings. So this is general idea. So you hear the word chitta, chitta bhumi, all these things will give you an idea that this is the place of our innermost desires and feelings and thoughts arising from there. So it basically forms the makeup of the human being we are, composed of the three guna in varied proportions. So this gives the color to our chitta, and through this colored chitta, the objects we are, the percepts we are perceiving. A non-empty repository, so something which has these thoughts and feelings, so has these attitudes and desires, is like a lake with ripples and currents, and the percept are accordingly modified when presented to the self. Whatever that reflection is coming there, that reflection will be shaped by these ripples and currents in the field of chitta. So my ripples and currents, your ripples and currents, a dog's ripples and currents will all be different. Okay. And accordingly, the reality that they are observing will be different. The percepts that they are perceiving will be different, but they will be of the same thing. So what Patanjali Yoga Sutra says is that with sublimation or tranquilization of these other contents in the field of consciousness, all these different contents that we are having in our field of consciousness, the self remains the only content shining in this field. The self remains the only content shining in this field. So you see, gradually this thing will happen if we are able to do the sublimation, tranquilization of the other contents in the field of consciousness. Gradually we will reach to this particular state where the self is the only content in the field of consciousness. And in the presence of the other content, what happens? The reverse thing happens. The self is unable to shine through in the field of consciousness in its complete glory. So it shines through all these different percepts. It shines through all these different percepts. So so right now I am shining through, myself is shining through all these different things, the tables, you, other people's words, and other people's whatever they are thinking, they are speaking aloud, all these things, myself is shining through all these things and coming back to me. Myself in its purity is not shining within me at this moment. Okay. Now I would like to present this idea that these other contents are temporary and changeable by their inherent nature. They will keep on changing. These other contents, they will keep on changing. hence they are non-absolute. So, and hence they are non-absolute, and what is the only absolute? The self is the only absolute truth that is experienced in the field of consciousness. So, I present the idea of the absolute truth and the non-absolute truth. So, all these which are temporary and changeable in character are non-absolute truths. They are truths right now. This is true. But they are non-absolute truth. They will change over time. What is not changing over time is the self which is there, although it is not able to shine through in its complete glory. But if I know some way, somewhere, sometime that I experience the self shining in its complete glory, I will know forever that it is there, although it is shining now through all these different percepts. So it is like people in England, maybe a kid in England will not know that there is something called sun in the sky unless one fine day the sun comes out, because in England most of the time it is cloudy, right? So the child will not know that there is a sun in the sky, but one fine day the sun will come out when the clouds are not there, and from the next day onwards, even though the clouds are there, the child will know that the sun is also there. He will never doubt that the sun is there in the sky ever again, even though for the rest of his life he sees cloudy skies. Okay, so this is like that. So you know when the absolute truth you know and you experience, you will know that it is the absolute truth and the others are non-absolute truths. So again a question, should not there be some arrow here? Because I am already saying something like this: the self remains the only content shining in the field, and so what do you suppose? So look at all these arrows. Self loop could be there. So it's a self loop, right? The self comes back to the self. So it is the only content, but who is perceiving? The self will perceive only, because it is the only perceiver. And what is left to be perceived? Self is only left to be perceived. No other thing is there in that field of consciousness. Self comes back to the self. This is a very peculiar state, and this state is the state of yoga as described in Patanjali and maybe in many other textbooks. So what we usually experience is not this last state but the other states, which are modifications. So we can say now, if this is the absolute truth, these all other three are modifications of the absolute truth. These are modifications of the absolute truth. The absolute truth, which is the self, trying to come back to the self, but through these percepts. Through all these different percepts, they are coming back. So it is modified. The absolute is modified in some way. So they are modified truths. And why they are modified? Due to materialistic contents clouding the chitta. The vortices of these materialistic contents are termed as chitta vritti. And then Patanjali defines in the second sutra that the sublimation of these chitta vrittis, the restraint of these chitta vrittis is yoga, is defined as yoga. So when these chitta vrittis are restricted, then we come to this particular state. Yes. Let us see how it remains there, or what remains there. So what is the new thing here? In this state of yoga, the observer of the self is established in its true nature. The observer of the self in the state of yoga is established in its true nature without the modifications. It is established in its true nature. The experience is of the pure self only, devoid of any imposition or corruption of materialistic contents. So what will be the experience? Experience will be the pure self only. You will experience yourself in all its purity, without any imposition of any materialistic contents. So where the materialistic contents were in that blue part, so that blue will not be there, right? The blue should not be there. Logically, the blue should not be there because it is devoid of any imposition of or corruption of the materialistic contents. So there is nothing. So I represent it with black again. Okay, and we'll see what it means later on in my presentation. So when not established, so now I go back to this. So we are talking about the state of yoga, but when we are not established in yoga, most of the time, most of our lives, we are not established in yoga, and perhaps all of our life we are not established in yoga. The experience in the field of consciousness is that of modifications brought about by the materialistic contents, and these modifications are termed as chitta vrittis in Patanjali Yoga Sutra. And since the unmodified state I have defined as the experience of absolute truth, I can now define these chitta vrittis as modified truths. The absolute truth getting modified in some way. So these are modified truths. And I present these English translations that I have made, not translations but some phrases in order to understand these Sanskrit words. I present it to you and I welcome your comments and other things. That pramana are valid truths. This is pramana, this is valid, completely valid. That I am experiencing all these things, completely valid. Valid truth. Vipadaya are false truths. Vikalpa are invalid truths. Nidra, unreal truth. And Smriti, remembered truth. So we go to this one by one and try to understand why I coined these terms. Pramana is valid truth because Pratyakṣa Anuman Shabda considered as pramana. They are valid perceptions of reality. They are considered to be valid perceptions of reality. But obviously they are not reality as it is. Because we have already understood that reality as it is only the pure self shining in the field of consciousness, that absolute truth. So it is not that absolute truth, but it is a valid truth. It is a valid perception. So we call it a valid truth. And we can understand that it is different in different living beings with different endowments of their sense organs. So the pramana will be different. So it cannot be considered as the absolute. Okay. So that is one way to even understand that. Viparaya is false truth. It is where the perception itself is false. So the percept, which is a reflection of one object, so something is coming in your field of consciousness as a percept, but you are taking that percept in yourself, but you are mistaking it to be the percept of another object. This is what is happening. So this is what is that common example, that mistaking the rope as a snake. Mistaking the rope as a snake. The rope came in your consciousness, but you are seeing it, you are perceiving it as snake. Okay, so that is what is happening, and this I can say is false truth. Then invalid truth. Invalid truths are like words and statements that correspond to no valid perception of reality. So like as people in science, we would appreciate that we can make a mathematical model which is all complete by itself, but it does not have any correspondence to reality. It is perfectly valid in itself, but we cannot say that it is a truth in the sense that it represents something in reality. So we will say that it is an invalid truth. Similarly, this sentence is that there is a unicorn race tomorrow. Perfectly correct sentence in itself, but it does not have any correspondence to reality. So we say that it is also an invalid truth. These are vikalpas. These are vikalpas to what there is in the for normal way of perception. Nidra, why I call this unreal truth? In the state of sleeping, we are switched off from our usual experience of reality, but still there is some perception, like dreams come and all these things. This perception is not situated in reality. this perception is not situated in reality. Okay, and hence we can call this unreal. Both dream and sound sleep falls in this category. Even I can make the daydreaming and imagination fall in this category, because when we are daydreaming and imagining, we are cut off from the otherwise usual perception of reality, and the daydreaming and all these things are like unreal truths. Okay. And Smriti, the remember truth. So Varakhedi was mentioning that Smriti is also a form of perception. It is perfectly a form of perception and considered by Patanjali. Smriti, remembered truth, but whether it is Pratyakṣa or not, there can be a debate around it. So all previous forms of perception are sometimes recalled in our memory, and this forms a new perception, because whenever you recall these perceptions, they are recalled in a slightly distorted way. They are not recalled exactly in the same manner. So it forms a new perception within you, which is distinct from those before, and this can be called smriti or remembered truth. So these are the modified truths which we experience in our life. Patanjali says that we have the ability to restrain these modifications through two things, which are abhyas and vairagya. Abhyas means practice, vairagya means non-attachment, and I am writing down the shlokas, also numbers in below, which talks about this. So what is practice? Continuous effort to restrain the modifications, and non-attachment is continuous effort to be desireless of all forms of perception. And how are these attained? These are attained through the power of devotion to the end that is to be attained, which is in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, the end is self-realization. So he is talking about that, and attained through the power of renunciation through all that is not self, till the true self is discovered. So these are some ways with which he starts the Patanjali Yoga Sutra, different methods that he keeps on describing in order to come into the state of self-realization, the state of yoga, and he goes on talking about many other different methods. And I think the final methodology that he talks about is the Ashtanga Yoga. And after that, he starts on talking about the effects that this bring to us when we go into the journey. And the final effect that they bring to us is Kaivalya, or ultimate freedom. And what he is saying here is that in this shloka, in this sutra, he is saying that once the luminosity and transparency of consciousness have become as distilled as pure awareness, they can reflect the freedom of awareness back to itself. So this is the sutra that gave me the confidence to draw that diagram where the self is coming back to itself through the field of consciousness. So here it is saying that once the luminosity and transparency of consciousness have become as distilled as pure awareness. Distilled as pure awareness means there is nothing, no more such materialistic contents, vrittis, etc. in that field of consciousness. The field of consciousness is completely black, so as to say. Then they can reflect the freedom of awareness, the self coming back to itself. So this is the diagrammatic representation that we can make of this particular state that happens. Now, usually we are in this state, even when colored. So this they are again mentioning about this state and trying to bring out some property of consciousness. After actually in the Kaivalya Pada, he is trying to bring out this new property of consciousness. After we understand what is Kaivalya, he is saying that even when colored by countless latent traits, all these chitta vrittis and other traits and impressions, all these things out there, consciousness, like every compound phenomenon, has another purpose, which is to serve awareness. The purpose of consciousness is to serve awareness, and we can maybe understand that is why the consciousness as a field is always surrounding this awareness. It has the purpose to serve that awareness. So it will always remain associated with that awareness. Next, another sutra 4.25, as soon as one is able to distinguish between consciousness and awareness, the ongoing construction of the false self ceases. So when one has attained the kaivalya or the self-realization, after the self-realization only, they will be able to distinguish that the self is something and the field of consciousness was something, is something through which the self is perceiving everything in reality. These two are not the same. So there will be this gap created between the self and the field of consciousness. This gap does not create within us before we attain to self-realization. We cannot perceive, we cannot even understand what this gap is. It does not come in our experience, in our realization. Only it comes after self-realization. This gap comes, so one can distinguish between consciousness and awareness. And then the ongoing construction of the false self ceases, although you are able to perceive all these perceptions in the field of consciousness. Although the attained yogi can come here and see all of you like that, and the same phenomenon happens as it happens to me and you, that the self goes through all these percepts, come back. For that attained yogi, this is also happening, but that attained yogi does not construct his false self through these perceptions that we are trying to do. We are doing it that automatically. Okay, so that construction of the false self ceases in that attained yogi. So this is how the process actually goes. We are first in that state in the left hand side, then we come to the state of self-realization, then our state changes. In Kaivalya, ultimate freedom, what is the freedom? The freedom is that the false self ceases to construct itself. That is the freedom. We get free from the perceptions that try to do something, try to do some change in what we understand we are. Okay, so that is from where we get free. Consciousness, now oriented to this distinction, can gravitate towards freedom, the fully integrated knowledge that pure awareness is independent from nature. And this realization extinguishes both the causes of suffering and cycles of cause and effect. If you have read Sankhya Karika begins with the question how we can remove the pain and suffering, and Patanjali Yoga Sutra ends with the answer. And this is the conclusion, that this is the first. So this is a takeaway sort of thing. This is the first. This is a state, the left hand side, the state where we all are. We are all in the state of false perception, which we can call chitta vrittis, which we can call modified truth. Then we can come to the state of true perception, self-realization, absolute truth. Then we move to another state, which is some other different state of living, where there is a distinction between awareness and consciousness, and it causes end of suffering and cycles of cause and effect. So you don't associate cause and effect anymore to events, and it leads to end of suffering. So with that, I would like to end my presentation, and if you have any questions, I would like to take. Yes, please. Thank you. So more philosophical questions, I would possibly, only Madhumita ma'am is here, who might be able to take on my behalf if questions become more
Hello.
philosophical in nature. Anyway,
Hi, sir.
please have the questions coming in. Yes.
Sir, I would like to ask like how this will actually help some of the problems in consciousness science. We are actually having a problem of understanding what is the exact role of brain and the consciousness. Some people generally use the word it produces, and many terms are being used, but is the exact role? Since you mentioned the forms that appear in chitta, what is the any kind of reference to what is the exact role of brain in doing that?
Exact role of brain in perceiving these forms of consciousness, that you want to understand, or your question is something different? You want to understand the role of brain in perceiving these chitta vrittis, the 5 different modified forms.
So when you say percept is having in chitta, this percept is forms, colors, and those type of things. but this is not actually happening when you check the pathways in the brain. Brain contains only electrical signals, molecules, chemicals, also all type of signals are happening. But we perceive forms, colors, smells, everything. So this is what happening in chitta. So brain should be sufficient, but not enough to produce this, right? So this is the fundamental problem of called as hard problem in consciousness. So which is the yet to be solved now. So what is the Indian references giving to solve these kind of problems?
The solution, like you cannot really associate the brain functioning to these forms and shapes that are coming in. So how these forms and shapes are coming in, you cannot really have the answer coming from brain functions. Brain is doing some function as we are experiencing these forms and colors and forms, and all these perceptions are coming in us. Okay, and as you mentioned that yes, it is true, it is the hard problem of consciousness. And what is the solution, or what is the answer to it? The answer, like there is some way to answer it, is that it is a function of the consciousness. Now one has not been able to model the consciousness in a mathematical way, but one understands that this field of consciousness is there, and how we perceive things is dependent on that field of consciousness. This we understand. But how this field of consciousness is mapped to the brain, this I think the people who are working in that brain functioning and trying to relate consciousness to it, they would be right persons to ask whether they have solved it or not. I don't think they have solved it so far, but at least we can have this understanding that it is a function of the consciousness, and it will depend on one consciousness to other. One being to another being will have this field of consciousness very different, and the perception that they will be having will be very different. And one talk also pointed out that the sense organs are also very different, and that may be leading to these perceptions being very different. So that may be an external cause, but there is an internal cause, which is the field of consciousness as well. And we modeled, so we did a small presentation where we modeled everything as a lens of consciousness. So the Purusha is there in this body. The entire embodiment we can call as a lens of consciousness. Even the physical, so you see the retina changing and all these things, is changing the way it is perceiving, it is experiencing the world out there. So the qualia changes, not just because of this causal body, but also because of the other bodies which are there, starting from the physical body. So everything that is out there is a lens of consciousness. Everything that is out there comprises of the lens of consciousness. This is how we try to model it. Yes, next question. Yes, sir.
Regarding this slide, sir, false perception, chittavrittis, true perception, self-realization. So, if you take chittavritti pramana, it's not a false perception.
Pramana is a valid perception.
So, false perception, you have written all chittavrittis. So, that
Yeah.
should exclude pratyaksha. That is pramana. Pramana should be valid. No?
Pramana is also there in the chitta vrittis.
But pramana is not false.
I think I should modify. This should be modified perception, not false perception.
Yeah, and there's a simple observation in the beginning slides.
Yeah.
Somewhere you mentioned that self is experienced by, so that sentence, my observer, in the state, the observer of the self is established, and then
The experience is of the pure self only. This one.
no, in blue, in one slide there is one sentence in blue, maybe next or previous one.
Previous.
Just the self is the only absolute truth that is experienced in the field of consciousness. My observation is self is the experiencer, and Sankhya Yoga philosophy says it is never experienced, avishayaha. So just an observation that self cannot be the experienced according to Sankhya and Yoga. because everywhere it says it is only experiencer. So that I have found here. And last one, sir, with due respect to your understanding of the subject, I'm just adding that
Any slide
yeah,
on it, sir?
just a minute, sir. Yeah, the Yoga Sutra says in the fourth pada that sadajñātāh chittavrittayah tat prabhuv purushasya aparinamitvat. So it says that nothing is there, and that is, as you said, the kaivalya, ardhat kritardhanam gunanam pratiprasavaha swarupa pratishtava chitshakta is the last sutra. So there, nothing is there, it remains. That's what they were discussing in the afternoon also, that actually yastu ekagre chetasi sadbhutam ardham pradyotayeti kshinoti cha kleshan karmabandhanani shlatayeti sa samprajñātah. So that yogaja pratyaksha comes under this samprajñāta. Then there is the higher state asamprajñāta. Then as you mentioned dharmamega samadhi, then only kaivalya. So there actually the arrow need not be taken. That's my observation.
That self loop you are saying.
Because self does not come to self. It is actually alone. That is kaivalya. That itself says it stands aloof or lone. That means nothing is coloring. Simple addition. So see this in one slide you mentioned that self characterizes or something like that particular verb. My problem is in Sankhya Yoga philosophy, self is not the karta. So no kriya there, no activity, nothing. So self doing something is not acceptable to Sankhya Yoga. Whatever is done, that is only the activity of Prakriti. They say Prakriti hi kartri, Prakriti kriyamananam gunaih karmani sarvashaha ahankara vimudhatma karta aham iti manyate. Bhagavad Gita reiterates the same. So when we write, I think we should take proper care that the original theories are not disturbed. Soham sir, this is my observation.
Yes. So one thing I would like to, a few things I would like to also discuss here. One thing is that in Sankhya, the Purusha comes in proximity with the Prakriti.
Purusha doesn't come. Prakriti comes in the proximity of Purusha because Purusha is inactive.
Purusha is inactive.
So Purusha does not come. So it is actually Prakriti doing all the activities. So Prakriti comes into the contact of Purusha, they say. This is what Prakriti Purusha Sanyogas Tatkrita Sargaha. The commentaries also explain that Prakritaha, Purushaha, Akriyaha. Prakriti hi Sarvakartri. So that Sanyoga, Vijnana Bhikshu also explains that Sanyoga is not temporal or spatial. It is Bhoktru Bhogya Bhava Sambandhaha in Yoga Vartika. So actually further deep study.
My understanding so far had been that Purusha comes in proximity with the Prakriti, only then the Prakriti gets into the modifications and the expressions that it shows to the Purusha.
Because Purusha is Udasina, sir.
Udasina, it remains Udasin.
Because coming or getting into the contact of Prakriti is not possible because Vasanas, Samskaras are not there in Purusha. So nothing to motivate.
But then it gets created also in Purusha, right?
No.
Not in Purusha, but in the field.
In the Chitta only.
In the Chitta only. The Chitta is associated with the Purusha.
Because last pada of Yoga Sutra says, Hetu phalashraya lambanaihi sangrihi tattva tadabhave esham abhava. So it relates that all tendencies, all impressions, they subsist in the Chitta.
Yes.
Not in the Purusha. Therefore, nothing is there in Purusha to motivate to come in contact. So that's what Sankhya Karika, last Karika say, that Nirgunam Purusham Prachodayati Saguna Prakritihi Saguna Esha Saptabhihi Rupaihi Badhnati Ekarupena Mochayati. So all these Karikas explain that all activities is there in Prakriti.
And actually Sankhya Karika also says that it is not the Purusha that gets liberated.
Yeah.
It is the Prakriti that gets liberated.
Yeah. Badhyate
It is
muchyate
there in the
nanashraya
Sankhya
prakritihi. They
And
say.
here also it is said that the consciousness gravitates towards freedom. The consciousness gravitates towards freedom, not the self. The self is already free.
Yeah, here also, if you say consciousness and self are different,
Yeah, I am
so
using
then
it
it will
in a
come in
different-
the vikalpa, chittavritti, because shabda jnananupati vastu shunyo vikalpaha. That means chaitanyam purushasya swarupam. This is the example given in the bhashya. And it says, if you differentiate between self and consciousness, it will be vikalpa chittavritti because both are one.
both become one here when it becomes devoid of the different colors, different chitta vrittis. That when the vrittis are no more in the chitta, only then the chitta and the self becomes the same thing.
They are same. Actually, there is one. Yeah.
But in order to understand the different states in which they work, we have to make the distinction that they are different.
And in the beginning, sir, you asked about one small addition that pramana, Pratyakṣa pramana and other pramanas. So in Nyaya Shastra, Nyaya Bhashya, it is accepted with the title Pramana Samplavaha. That means same thing can be perceived differently with the help of perception, with the help of inference, with the help of other means also. For they accept, and there is no wrong in that. And uh, just the first slide, you were asking between the Atma, that self and soul, Chitta and Atma.
This is how I am.
Ha,
Self and soul. And negating that self and soul is different.
ha.
Because
So-
many places I have seen the
Actually,
soul.
we don't have soul concept, sir. We have
we don't
only
have.
self, that
Yeah.
is Atma. But Jivatma, Pretatma, Bhutatma may be there, I don't know. But Jivatma is there, and Jivatma is nothing but the conditioned self. Ha. So everybody says yoga and
Yeah,
Vedanta
yeah.
also. So,
So
thank
when
you,
these
sir.
conditions go away, then things become same.
Causal body. You cannot say that soul is a
Ah,
causal
Jivatma best. We don't believe in soul. Soul is English,
We should conclude the
Western.
discussion. A wonderful lecture by
body.